The clock read 11:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was in my office on the 90th floor of the Sterling Spire, the skyscraper I had designed, built, and now owned. The air up here was always perfect, filtered, and smelled faintly of ozone and expensive espresso. My tablet chimed with a security notification. It wasn't from the building's main grid but from the high-end boutique located in the lobby, a tenant I had personally vetted. I accessed the live feed. The camera angle was crisp. There was my mother-in-law, Cynthia, standing at the counter. She was holding my black card, the one with the $60,000 limit. Next to her was a girl I recognized from Brandon's work dinners, Chloe. Chloe was pointing at a pair of red-bottomed heels that cost more than my first car. Cynthia laughed, patting Chloe's arm. The audio feed was clear enough to catch every word. "Don't worry about Alexis," Cynthia said, her voice dripping with amusement. "She's just the property manager. My son runs this building. He lets her play with the paperwork to make her feel important." I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I simply picked up my tablet. My finger hovered over the suspend all access button for a fraction of a second, just long enough to appreciate the irony. Then I tapped it. "Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." Protocol Zero wasn't a tantrum. It was a structural demolition. I didn't throw the tablet or scream at the glass walls. I simply opened the master control app for the Sterling Spire, a piece of software I had coded myself during the building's construction phase. It gave me God mode access to everything from the HVAC systems to the financial servers. My fingers moved with the muscle memory of a pianist. First, the liquidity. I accessed the joint accounts. I didn't just freeze them. I initiated a security lockdown protocol reserved for severe data breaches. The system instantly flagged every card bearing the Hayes name as compromised. Down in the lobby, the terminal in Cynthia's hand would be flashing a hard decline. I imagined the exact shade of red her face was turning, contrasting clashingly with the $60,000 limit she thought she possessed. Next, the transport. I pulled up the building's valet log. Brandon's Aston Martin, a vehicle leased under Sterling Architecture's fleet account, was currently idling in the VIP lane. He liked to keep it there, purring and ready in case he needed to make a dramatic exit to a business lunch that was actually a date with Chloe. I tapped the icon for the head of security. "Vehicle license plate Bravo Echo 7 is unauthorized," I typed. "Tow it to the impound lot immediately. Do not release without my biometric signature." I watched the feed. 2 minutes later, I saw my security team, men and women I paid well above market rates, surround the car. The valet, looking confused, handed over the keys. They hooked it up to the tow truck that was always on standby for illegal parkers. Brandon wasn't just losing his ride. He was losing his symbol of potency. Finally, the access. This was the most satisfying cut. The Sterling Spire had a private elevator that shot directly from the lobby to the penthouse. It required a biometric scan. Cynthia loved that elevator. She used it to bypass the commoners in the main lobby. I pulled up her user profile. Under authorization level it read, "Family." I deleted the tag. I reclassified her as guest, restricted. Then I did the same for Brandon. It took exactly 4 minutes. In 240 seconds, I had stripped them of their money, their mobility, and their access to my home. The silence in my office was absolute. The only sound was the low hum of the server rack in the corner processing the new reality. Downstairs, their world was collapsing into chaos. Up here, the air was cool, filtered, and perfectly still. I wasn't a wife discovering an affair. I was a CEO liquidating a non-performing asset. And I was just getting started. The silence in my office was deafening after the chaos I'd just orchestrated. I sat back in my Herman Miller chair, swiveling slightly to look out at the Chicago skyline. This wasn't just a city. It was my canvas. I had reshaped its horizon with the Sterling Spire, a testament to my vision and sheer force of will. But at home, inside the very walls I had built, I had allowed myself to become structurally unsound. For 5 years I had played the role of the supportive wife. I had smiled when Brandon introduced himself as a developer at parties, correcting people only gently when they assumed I was his assistant. I had nodded along when Cynthia bragged about her son's business acumen, knowing full well his only business was spending my money. I had paid him a stipend, $18,000 a month, not because he earned it, but because I needed it. I needed the camouflage. I closed my eyes and the truth washed over me, cold and unmerciful. I hadn't been tricked. I hadn't been a naive girl, swept off her feet by a charming con artist. I was Alexis Sterling. I didn't do naive. I did strategy. Brandon wasn't a partner, he was a purchase. I had hired him. I had looked at the landscape of my life, the grueling hours, the constant pressure, the isolation of being a female CEO in a male-dominated industry, and I had decided that a relationship based on traditional gender roles would be too much work. I didn't want a power struggle at home. I didn't want to fight for dominance over dinner. I wanted someone who looked good in a tuxedo, who could charm investors at galas, and who would be grateful for the life I provided. I had paid for a trophy husband. I had constructed a human shield to protect myself from the loneliness of leadership and the judgment of a society that still looked askance at powerful single women. At least she has a husband, they would whisper. She can't be that cold if someone married her. Brandon was my beard for normalcy. And Cynthia, she was part of the package deal, the eccentric demanding mother-in-law that made the family tableau complete. I had tolerated her entitlement because it fit the narrative. I had let them believe they were the main characters because it allowed me to work in peace. But I had made a critical calculation error. I had assumed that their gratitude would be the mortar that held this arrangement together. I had assumed that $18,000 a month would buy loyalty. Instead, it had bought contempt. They didn't respect me because I hadn't demanded respect. I had simply paid for compliance. And like any bad employee who realizes the boss isn't watching, they had started to steal. The realization burned, but it also clarified. I wasn't a victim of their greed. I was a victim of my own bad investment. I had built a foundation on sand, and now the cracks were showing. But unlike a building, I couldn't just reinforce the beams. This project was a total loss. I opened my eyes. The city lights were starting to twinkle below a grid of electricity and ambition. I wasn't going to cry over a bad hire. I was going to liquidate the asset. I was going to tear it all down to the studs and rebuild something honest. And the demolition had already begun. My phone on the desk started buzzing violently, interrupting the silence. I glanced at the caller ID, Cynthia. She was calling me from the lobby 40 floors below. I let it ring. Once. Twice. Then I picked up, putting it on speaker without saying a word. Alexis, Cynthia's voice screeched through the speaker, so high-pitched it was distorting. What is going on? The card was declined, in front of important clients. Important clients, I repeated, my voice calm, almost bored. You mean the 24-year-old you were buying shoes for? There was a stuttered pause on the other end. She is. She is an associate of Brandon's. Don't change the subject. You forgot to pay the bill, didn't you? You incompetent girl. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for the family? I didn't forget anything, Cynthia, I said, leaning back in my chair. I canceled the card. You what? Before she could launch into another tirade, another notification pinged on my laptop. It was a text from Brandon. What the fuck, Lexi? My car just got towed from the valet. They said you authorized it. Fix this now. I have a lunch meeting in 10 minutes. I looked at the text, then back at the phone where Cynthia was now hyperventilating, and I canceled the car service. I added, and your elevator pass. You're currently trespassing in a secure building. Trespassing, Cynthia shrieked. This is my son's building. He built this. You are just the decorator. Get down here right now and fix this mess before I call Brandon and have him fire you. The delusion was breathtaking. It was a masterpiece of denial. She genuinely believed it. She believed that her son, a man who couldn't balance a checkbook, was the titan behind sterling architecture. She believed I was just the help. And Brandon. He was so deep in his own lie he thought he could order me to return his toy car while he was on his way to cheat on me. I'm not coming down, Cynthia, I said. And Brandon isn't coming to save you. He's currently trying to figure out how to pay for his Uber. You are destroying this family, she yelled. You are petty and jealous and small. When Brandon gets here, I cut her off, my voice turning icy. Tell him to check his email. I've sent him a meeting invite. Penthouse. Tonight. 8 p.m. Don't be late. I hung up. The silence returned, but the air in the room felt different now. Charged. They weren't just annoyed anymore. They were panicked. The illusion was cracking. They were like actors on a stage who suddenly realized the scenery was falling down around them, but they still didn't understand the scope of the collapse. They thought this was a glitch, a mistake, a temporary tantrum from the property manager. They had no idea I was the one holding the sledgehammer. And tonight I was going to swing it. I stood up and walked to the wall safe hidden behind a minimalist abstract painting. The keypad beeped softly as I entered the code, my birthday, a date Brandon had forgotten for 3 years running. The heavy steel door swung open, revealing the neatly organized reality of my life. I pulled out a thick, leather-bound binder labeled Hayes Family Trust. It was a document Brandon had asked me to sign 2 years ago, claiming it was for estate planning. I had read it, of course. It was a poorly drafted attempt to transfer ownership of the penthouse into a trust controlled by him. I hadn't signed it. Instead, I'd had my lawyers draft a counter-document, a post-nuptial agreement that clarified ownership down to the last light bulb. He had signed it without reading, assuming it was the paperwork he'd requested. Next to the binder sat a small velvet jewelry box. I opened it. Inside lay a diamond necklace and a pair of emerald earrings, the Hayes family heirlooms. Cynthia had given them to me on my wedding day with a tearful speech about passing down the family legacy. These have been in the Hayes family for 4 generations, she had sobbed. They are priceless. Promise me you'll protect them. I picked up the necklace. It felt heavy, convincing. But I knew the truth. 5 years ago, right before the wedding, I had hired a private investigator to look into the Hayes family finances. I found out they were destitute. Their old money had evaporated in bad investments decades ago. Cynthia had pawned the real heirlooms in the 90s to pay for a country club membership she couldn't afford. When I found out, I didn't expose them. I wanted to protect Brandon's pride. So, I had quietly bought high-end replicas, costume jewelry made with cubic zirconia and lab-created emeralds, and arranged for them to reappear in a safety deposit box Cynthia had forgotten about. I let her believe she had found them. I let her have her moment. And now she was threatening to sell them. I went back to my desk and pulled up the security feed again. I rewound the footage to 10 minutes before the card was declined. The audio was crystal clear. Cynthia and Chloe were sitting on a velvet bench in the boutique, heads close together. As soon as Alexis is out, Cynthia whispered, her eyes gleaming with malice, we'll move you into the penthouse. It needs a woman's touch. Alexis has it looking like a sterile hospital. You can redecorate. We'll sell some of the heirlooms if we need quick cash for the lawyers to push her out. Those emeralds alone should bring $50,000. I watched Chloe nod, her eyes wide with greed. Brandon says the building is worth millions. We'll be set for life. I closed the laptop. The sunk cost fallacy, the idea that you continue a behavior or endeavor as a result of previously invested resources. Cynthia wasn't protecting her son. She was protecting her investment. She had spent her life crafting the myth of the Hayes dynasty. Admitting that her son was a failure, that their wealth was an illusion funded by the daughter-in-law she despised, would be a psychological death. She would rather bankrupt herself fighting for a lie than live for 1 second in the truth. She believed the heirlooms were her safety net. She believed they were her ticket to a legal war chest. I put the jewelry box into my purse. I added the binder. Then I added a thumb drive containing the security footage and the audio recording. I had the truth, the receipts, and the leverage. It was time to go home. The elevator ride to the penthouse was silent, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside my head. The doors slid open to reveal the familiar, expansive living room, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city I loved. Brandon and Cynthia were already there, seated on the white leather sofa like a tribunal. Brandon had managed to retrieve his car, or perhaps he'd taken a cab. Either way, he looked disheveled, his tie loosened, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. Cynthia was pacing, clutching a glass of wine that I recognized as a vintage I'd been saving for a special occasion. "You're here," Brandon said, standing up. He tried to muster an air of authority, but it cracked around the edges. "We need to talk, Lexi. This behavior, it's erratic. It's concerning. Freezing the accounts, locking my mother out, you're acting like a crazy person." "Sit down, Brandon," I said, my voice low and steady. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I walked past them to the dining table and placed the black folder in the center. "Both of you." Cynthia stopped pacing. She looked at the folder, then at me, her eyes narrowing. "Is this an apology? Because if you think a few papers are going to make up for the humiliation I suffered today." "Sit," I repeated. This time it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Reluctantly, they sat. I remained standing. The power dynamic in the room shifted, palpable as a change in air pressure. "I'm not here to apologize," I began. "I'm here to clarify the terms of your residency in the Sterling Spire." I opened the folder. First, I pulled out the thumb drive and plugged it into the smart system control panel on the wall. The room's massive screen flickered to life. The audio filled the space, Cynthia's voice sharp and conspiratorial, followed by Chloe's eager agreement. "We'll move you into the penthouse. Alexis has it looking like a sterile hospital. Those emeralds alone should bring $50,000. Brandon's face went white. Cynthia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That is taken out of context," she sputtered. "I was joking, it was just banter." "Banter about selling my property to fund a legal battle against me?" I asked. Interesting sense of humor. I stopped the recording and turned back to the table. "Let's talk about those heirlooms." I opened the velvet box, revealing the glittering necklace and earrings. Cynthia's eyes widened, a flicker of greed, replacing the fear. "You stole them," she accused. "Those belong to the family." "These," I said, picking up the necklace and letting it dangle from my fingers, "are cubic zirconia set in silver-plated alloy. I bought them on Canal Street 5 years ago for $300. Cynthia froze. Brandon looked from the jewelry to his mother, confusion warring with horror. "What?" he whispered. "Your mother pawned the real ones in 1998, I said, looking directly at Cynthia. "To pay off a gambling debt. I found out before the wedding. I bought these replicas so you wouldn't be embarrassed, Brandon. I let her play the matriarch. I let you believe in a legacy that didn't exist." I dropped the necklace onto the table. It landed with a cheap, tinny clatter that echoed in the silence. Everything you think you have, I continued, pulling out the payroll documents, is an illusion I paid for. The stipend. That's not profit sharing, Brandon. That's an allowance. You are an employee of Sterling Architecture, categorized as lifestyle liaison. And as of noon today, your position has been terminated. Brandon stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The reality was crashing down on him, the car, the clothes, the status, it was all a costume I had rented for him. And finally, I said, sliding the eviction notices across the table. This apartment. It's owned by a trust. My trust. You are guests. And your guest privileges have been revoked. You can't do this, Cynthia wailed, tears streaming down her face, now ruining her makeup. We're family, you can't just throw us on the street. I'm not throwing you on the street, I said coldly. I'm escorting you out of my building. Security is on the way up. You have 10 minutes to pack your personal effects. Anything you leave behind will be donated. The elevator chimed. 2 of my security guards stepped out, their faces impassive. Brandon looked at them, then at me. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was a man realizing he was about to lose the only thing that had ever made him feel important, me. Lexi, please, he begged, his voice cracking. I love you. No, Brandon, I said, turning away to look out the window at the city lights. You loved the view. And now you don't have access to it anymore. I stood by the window watching the city breathe below me as the drama unfolded behind me. The guards were professional, efficient. They handed Brandon and Cynthia empty boxes, not the sturdy moving crates I used for projects, but flimsy cardboard things meant for temporary displacement. 10 minutes, the lead guard said, checking his watch. Brandon didn't argue. He moved like a sleepwalker, grabbing clothes from the closet, stuffing them haphazardly into a box. He grabbed his watch case, then hesitated, looking at me. I didn't turn around. He left it. Cynthia was less resigned. She was trying to negotiate bargaining with the security team, with Brandon with the air itself. I need my vase, she cried, pointing to a monstrosity I had always hated. It's an antique. It's from Pier 1, I said, my reflection in the window catching her eye. Leave it. When they were finally packed, standing by the elevator with their meager possessions, they looked small. The penthouse usually filled with their noise, and their demands felt vast and empty. Where will we go? Brandon asked, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, hoping for one last bailout, one final swipe of the black card. There's a motel off the interstate, I said. The Starlight Inn. It's affordable. I checked. Affordable, Cynthia spat the word like a curse. You're sending us to a motel. I'm sending you to your reality, I replied. You have no credit, no assets, and no job. A motel is generous. They stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, severing them from my life. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a profound, quiet relief, like setting down a heavy pack after a long hike. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the building's security system. Unit 9001, access denied. User Brandon Hayes. He had tried to come back up. The system had rejected him. Then another buzz. A text from Chloe. Hey, so, Brandon says there's a misunderstanding about the penthouse. Is he really, broke? Because I have other offers. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. I typed back, he's broke, unemployed, and homeless. Good luck. I blocked the number. Brandon would go to her, hoping for comfort, for a place to stay. And she would look at his cardboard boxes, his lack of a black card, his desperation, and she would do exactly what she was built to do. She would leave. He would realize, then truly realize, that without me he was nothing. He was a man who had traded a kingdom for a reflection in a puddle. Cynthia would try to pawn the heirlooms. I imagined the scene at the pawn shop, the appraiser's loop, the shake of the head, the humiliating revelation that her legacy was worth less than the gas it took to drive there. They were about to learn the hardest lesson of all: status isn't transferable and lies don't pay the rent. I took a sip of water. It tasted clean, cold, perfect. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office in the Sterling Spire, looking out at the city I had helped shape. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the buildings, painting the glass facades in hues of orange and violet. It was a view I never tired of, a reminder of what could be built from the ground up with vision and persistence. In my hand, I held my tablet. The screen displayed the building's master security interface. I navigated to the user database. There were 2 profiles flagged for review, Brandon Hayes and Cynthia Hayes. Their status was currently guest I, restricted, a temporary measure I had implemented during the eviction. I tapped on Brandon's profile. His biometric data, fingerprints, retinal scan, facial recognition, was stored securely in the system. It was the key that had given him access to my world, to the penthouse, to the private gym, to the executive lounge. It was the digital footprint of his entitlement. I didn't feel anger anymore. The rage that had fueled Protocol Zero had burned itself out, leaving behind a clear, cool resolve. I felt like an architect looking at a finished blueprint, identifying the final unnecessary lines that cluttered the design. Delete, I whispered. I confirmed the action. The system processed for a moment, then flashed a green check mark. User deleted. Brandon Hayes no longer existed within the Sterling Spire. To the building, he was a stranger. I did the same for Cynthia. User deleted. It was done. They were erased from the building's nervous system. I walked back to my desk and set the tablet down. The silence in the office was profound, a stark contrast to the chaos of the last week. I thought about the emptiness of the penthouse, the boxes gone, the vase gone, the noise of their demands finally silenced. Some might call it lonely. I called it spacious. I wasn't just reclaiming my physical space. I was reclaiming my mental real estate. For years, I had let them squat in my mind their criticisms and needs, taking up valuable square footage. I had let them convince me that I needed them to be complete, that a trophy husband and a legacy family were necessary accessories for a successful woman. But you don't fight termites with anger. You fight them by removing the wood they feed on. You strip the structure down to its steel bones, and you realize that the steel was strong enough to stand on its own all along. My mercy was letting them leave with their clothes and a prepaid lease. My justice was ensuring they left with nothing else, no unearned status, no stolen credit, no access to the life I had built. They had wanted the view from the top without climbing the stairs. Now they were back at the bottom and I was still here. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, filtered air of my office. I picked up my phone and opened the camera app. I turned it around to face the city, capturing the reflection of myself in the window, a woman standing tall in a tower of her own making. I didn't post it. I didn't need the likes. I just saved it to a folder marked renovations. Then I turned off the lights and walked to the elevator. It was time to go home, to my home. If you've ever had to renovate your life to get rid of the pests, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to remember they own the deed to their own life. S.